In the quiet, seemingly idyllic town of Ashford, nestled at the edge of a thick, mysterious forest, strange things had begun to happen. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where the town square remained peaceful, and where the rustling of the wind through the trees was the loudest sound most days. The kind of place where you could hear a pin drop. But in the last few weeks, there had been whispers. Whispers of strange disappearances, strange occurrences, strange sights in the woods. No one wanted to believe it, but the stories persisted. It was on one such evening that Tom and Chris, two delivery men, found themselves driving deeper into the woods. They had been sent to deliver a package to an old, remote house nestled in the heart of the forest. A simple job, one that should have been done within minutes. But there was something off about this delivery. The order had come through a reputable app, promising swift payment for a simple task. Yet the address was vague, not listed on any maps, and the customer's name was nothing more than a jumble of letters. It seemed like an error, but money was tight, so the two decided to take the job. Chris, ever the adventurous type, tried to ease the tension by cracking jokes, but Tom's unease only deepened. "Doesn't this feel wrong to you?" Tom asked, his eyes scanning the thickening forest that seemed to swallow the road. "Relax. It's just an old house. Get in, get out, easy money," Chris responded dismissively, though his voice held an edge of uncertainty. The moment they turned down the narrow gravel driveway, a chill ran through the air. It was too quiet. Not even a bird could be heard. The house itself was an ancient relic, a decaying mansion that seemed like it had been standing there for centuries, if not longer. The windows were dark, as if the house hadn't been lived in for years, yet there was a faint glow emanating from behind dusty curtains. "Should we really be here?" Tom muttered as he parked the van, his hand trembling slightly. Chris didn't seem to mind. He grabbed the package, and without another word, both of them walked toward the front door. But the closer they got, the colder it felt, as if the house itself was sucking the warmth from the air. They knocked. No answer. Knocked again. Still no answer. "That's strange," Tom said, glancing over his shoulder. "Should we just leave it by the door?" Before Chris could respond, the door creaked open, revealing an old man with skin as thin as parchment. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken, and his smile unsettling. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes, cold, calculating. His voice was barely above a whisper when he spoke. "Are you the delivery men?" he asked, his eyes scanning them both, lingering for a moment too long on Chris. Tom hesitated, but nodded. "Yeah, we got a packet for you." Without a word, the old man stepped aside, allowing them to enter. The air inside was thick, heavy with an unnatural dampness. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, the furniture coated with dust. There was a strange smell, a mixture of decaying wood and something metallic. "Place the package on the table," the old man instructed, his voice low, almost hypnotic. His hands, gnarled and trembling, reached out for the box, but there was something off about how he handled it, his fingers brushing against the corners too carefully, too intentionally. Before they could question it, the door slammed shut behind them. "Did you hear that?" Chris asked, his voice cracking. But Tom was already looking toward the back of the house, where shadows danced against the walls as though something or someone was moving behind them. A muffled noise echoed through the silence, followed by a soft shuffle, like the drag of feet on the wooden floor. The old man didn't respond. Instead, he moved toward the corner of the room, his back turned. But that's when they saw it. The shape in the corner of the room, large and dark, the faint sound of slow, labored breathing. Tom and Chris exchanged a glance, both instinctively moving toward the door. But it was already too late. The old woman appeared in the doorway, her face gaunt, her hair wild, eyes gleaming with a twist of hunger. She said nothing, only stared, her lips curling into a grin that sent a wave of terror coursing through Tom's body. Before they could react, the room seemed to shift. The walls seemed to close in, and the floor beneath them groaned as though someone was moving underneath. "Run!" Chris yelled, grabbing Tom's arm, but it was too late. The old couple wasn't letting them leave. The lights flickered and then went out, plunging them into darkness. The old man's voice broke the silence, barely a whisper, but sharp as a knife. They're hungry. A sudden crash echoes through the darkness. Tom's scream is swallowed by the blackness, and the faint sound of footsteps follows, slowly but deliberately. Then, nothing but silence. It had been days since the delivery men had gone missing, and the people of Ashford had begun to whisper, though many were still unwilling to believe the stories circulating about the old house in the woods. They tried to shrug it off, but deep down, everyone felt it, that uncomfortable, gnawing feeling that something was terribly wrong. That's when Lena, Mark, Chloe, and Sarah, a group of old college friends, decided to take a trip to the very same woods. They had been planning a weekend getaway for months, a reunion of sorts. They wanted peace, quiet, and a chance to reminisce about old memories. The cabin they rented was secluded, deep in the forest, a place untouched by the world. From the outside, it looked quaint, rustic, even like a cozy hideaway. But the moment they stepped inside, they could feel it. The air was thick with an odd heaviness. The house felt off. "You're all being paranoid," Mark said as he tossed his duffel bag onto the couch. "It's just an old cabin. Let's enjoy the weekend." But Lena wasn't convinced. "It just feels wrong, Mark." Chloe laughed nervously. "I think you're just scared of being out in the middle of nowhere, Lena." Despite their reassurances, they couldn't shake the sense of unease that settled over them like a cloud. As the evening wore on, they gathered in the living room, sharing stories and laughter. But the longer they sat there, the more oppressive the silence became. The trees outside rustled in the wind, but there was something unnatural about the sound. It was too quiet, too still. The occasional snap of a branch was the only other sound in the night. Then, just as the conversation began to lull, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway. "Chloe?" Sarah called, glancing over her shoulder. No answer. Mark stood up, shaking his head. "It's probably just the wind." But Lena, ever the skeptic, wasn't so sure. "No, I'm going to check on her." She moved toward the hallway, but the moment she stepped into the dark corridor, she froze. There, just beyond the shadowed threshold, was a figure, a silhouette standing still, her breath caught in her throat. "Chloe?" she whispered, stepping forward. But the figure didn't respond. It didn't move. It just stood there, eerily still, watching. Lena took a hesitant step closer, but before she could say another word, the figure turned and disappeared into the darkness, its footsteps echoing down the hall. Mark's voice cracked from behind her. What was that?" Lena turned to him, her heart racing. "I don't know." The sound of a door, creaking open, broke the silence. Then, another shadow appeared. This time, it wasn't just Chloe. It was someone else, someone they didn't recognize. The shadows continued to close in around them, and before they knew it, one by one, they were gone. Each friend vanished, swallowed by the thickening night, their cries fading into the woods. And then Sarah was alone. The disappearance of the college friends was the final straw. The small town of Ashford was in a state of quiet panic. But amidst the whispers and growing fear, there was one man who couldn't resist digging deeper into the mystery: the nosy neighbor Gerald. Gerald had lived on the outskirts of Ashford for as long as anyone could remember. He was the kind of person who always knew a little too much about everyone's business. A man whose curiosity often bordered on obsession, and whose frequent visits to his neighbors were more like interrogations than friendly chats. He had seen the new couple moving into the house in the woods. The old man and woman, eccentric, mysterious, and reclusive. No one really knew much about them. And in a small town like Ashford, that was enough to set Gerald's imagination running wild. There was something about them that felt off. The night the college friends disappeared, Gerald knew something wasn't right. The house in the woods had been too quiet, too still. He could feel it in his gut. So he decided to pay them a visit. Gerald was no stranger to the old house. He'd passed it a few times on his walks, always glancing at the dark windows, wondering what kind of people would choose to live in such isolation. And so, on that fateful evening, with the wind howling through the trees and the sky, turning a deep shade of violet, Gerald made up his mind. "I'll figure this out," he muttered to himself, grabbing his flashlight and heading toward the woods. He was determined to uncover the truth. The closer he got to the house, the more the air seemed to thicken. The trees, usually a comforting canopy, now loomed ominously above him, their twisted branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. Gerald felt the cold creeping in, a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. When he reached the door, he hesitated for just a moment. A sense of unease washed over him, but his insatiable curiosity won out. He knocked. The door creaked open, revealing the same elderly man who had greeted the delivery man. His expression was eerily calm, his eyes dull and lifeless, as though he was expecting Gerald. "Can I help you?" the old man asked, his voice low, almost as though he was savoring the sound of it. "I'm just curious about you too," Gerald said, his tone light but probing. "Been hearing a lot of strange things around here lately. Thought I'd come checking on you." The old man's smile twisted into something unsettling. "Curiosity can be dangerous, my friend." Gerald, ignoring the warning, stepped inside. The air was thicker than before, heavy with the scent of decay. The house was dimly lit, the shadows stretching like long, dark fingers across the walls. The old woman appeared from the shadows, her eyes glinting with something inhuman. "Come in, Gerald," she said softly. "You've been waiting for this moment." Gerald's heart raced as he backed away, but the door slammed shut behind him, trapping him inside. His flashlight flickered, casting brief, erratic light across the room, but he couldn't find an escape. The walls seemed to press in on him, the air growing colder by the second. The old man stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. "You should have left when you had the chance." Before Gerald could react, the house seemed to come alive. The floorboards creaked underfoot, but it wasn't just the house groaning. It was the sound of something moving beneath the floors, a presence that was far from human. And then the shadows closed in. In a panic, Gerald ran toward the back door, but before he could reach it, a scream echoed through the house, high-pitched, guttural, and filled with raw terror. It was cut off abruptly. The old woman's eyes gleamed in the darkness as she whispered, "They're hungry." Ashford was slowly falling apart. The town was gripped in fear, whispers of the old house in the woods, spreading like wildfire. Every missing person left an emptier space in the hearts of the townspeople, and Sheriff Thomas, long a fixture of authority, was now just another name on a growing list of disappearances. It was late one evening when the town received the call they feared. Sheriff Thomas's vehicle had been found abandoned at the edge of the woods, the doors left wide open, his flashlight on the ground, and a faint trail of blood leading toward the ominous, decaying house. But there were no signs of struggle, no indication of what had happened. It was as though he had just vanished. The people of Ashford were desperate for answers, but none came. That's when Detective Elena was called in. Elena wasn't like the others, a seasoned investigator. Her sharp mind and methodical approach had solved cases that others had given up on. She wasn't afraid of the unknown, nor was she easily rattled. But the air around Ashford had a weight to it, something she couldn't quite place. The people were nervous, and with good reason. There was something deeply wrong here. Elena's first stop was the sheriff's office. What she found was chilling. Files were scattered across desks, half-empty coffee cups left untouched. The entire office was abandoned, as though Sheriff Thomas had simply walked out one day and never returned. No records of the missing individuals. No explanation. The phone rang, but when Elena answered, there was only static on the other end. The town's nervous energy seeped into her, but she had no time to waste. She needed to find the house. She needed to find out what had been happening. Driving down the familiar country roads, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that the trees around her were closing in. The forest loomed in the distance, thick and dark, as though it were hiding the secrets of the town. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the narrow dirt path that led to the house. Elena had dealt with dangerous criminals before, but this was different. This felt like something older, something that had been here long before Ashford was founded. She reached the house as twilight descended into darkness. It loomed before her like a dying creature, the windows black, the front door slightly ajar as though inviting her in. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as she stepped out her car and into the cold, damp air. The wind was eerily quiet, and the forest behind her was still, as though holding its breath. The door creaked as she pushed it open. Stepping inside, she immediately felt the heavy silence that enveloped the house. The air smelled old, musty, and faintly metallic. The floorboards groaned underfoot as if the house was waking up, and the walls seemed to lean in on her. Every corner was shrouded in shadow. Her flashlight flickered as she moved deeper into the house, its beam catching fleeting glimpses of old furniture draped in dust, photographs of people long forgotten, and a thick, dark stain that marred the wooden floor in the center of the room. Elena's breath caught in her throat as she knelt to examine it. The stain wasn't old. No, it was too fresh. It was blood, but it had dried in a way that suggested it had been there for days, even weeks. As she stood, she felt a presence, a shift in the air. Something was moving just beyond her line of sight. She spun around, gun raised, but saw nothing. The silence was deafening. She heard it then, a faint sound, breathing, low, steady, and slow. It wasn't her own. Elena's instinct screamed at her to leave, but something in the pit of her stomach told her she couldn't. Not yet. She moved cautiously, creeping down the hallway, her flashlight illuminating the darkness. The house seemed alive in a way she couldn't explain. The walls seemed to pulse with something darker than just dust and decay. A whisper echoed through the air, soft and chilling. "You shouldn't have come," it said. Elena's skin prickled. She knew it wasn't her imagination. That voice was real. Before she could react, she heard the unmistakable creak of floorboards. She whirled around, flashlight flickering. And there they were, the old man and woman, the ones everyone had been whispering about, the ones who had always been there, watching, waiting. They stood at the end of the hallway, their eyes empty and hollow, their expressions twisted in what could only be described as a grotesque smile. "We've been waiting for you, detective," the old man rasped, his voice like the crackling of dry leaves. "Why?" Elena's voice trembled as she backed away. The old woman stepped forward, her face inches from Elena's. "You were always meant to find us." Elena's pulse quickened. Her gun was still in her hand, but she didn't have time to think before the room seemed to close in on her. The walls groaned, and the shadows writhed around her. A cold gust of air whipped through the house, and suddenly, everything was darker. The flashlight died in her hand, casting her into complete blackness. The floor beneath her feet cracked. Something dragged across the floor, heavy and wet. She couldn't see, but she could hear the slow, agonizing scrape of claws. And then a scream. It wasn't hers. A horrific, guttural scream filled the air, and Elena's world was plunged into darkness. The unmistakable sound of something, someone moving toward her, and then silence. "They're hungry,"